Good day, everyone. Welcome back to the kitchen table. I'm back this week after a brief summer hiatus with episode 6 in the Canucks at the Kitchen Table series. My guest this episode is Peter Salemi, an online broadcaster and political commentator from Toronto. You can find Peter's content on his YouTube channel as well as on his Facebook page, and if you'd like to check out more of his work, please go there after the show. But before we get to the show, here is your invitation to please stick around for Time for the Show, broadcasting here live on Freethinkradio at 10 p.m. from the Hypercube on America's Wang, also known to some as Florida. And also your usual reminder to please check out previous episodes of Kitchen Table Conversations, which you can find on the Freethinkradio YouTube channel, where this will also be found shortly. And that's not all. Check back Tuesday for YouTube live streams, Wednesdays for live Short Bus podcast on Freethinkradio, and of course the usual 24/7 streaming music, entertainment, and randomness. So, without further ado, here's my conversation with Peter. Enjoy.
We'll start it off then. Thank you so much, Peter Salemi, for joining me here on the Kitchen Table podcast for the Canucks at the Kitchen Table series.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. So with this series, like you know, and most of the listeners probably know at this point, I've been talking to independent Canadian political and cultural commentators, and Peter is just such a guy. So to start off, I like to ask the guests just what motivated you to get into this situation and go online and make your channel, and kind of what was the backstory for you?
Well, it kind of goes about 20 years back. I've been studying and preaching the Bible for 20 years now, but then at the election of Donald Trump in 2016, and actually 2015 also with Justin Trudeau, something changed. I was talking about these political topics, but I was using the Bible and Bible prophecy, talking about it, and my message got out to the Americans, because they're a lot more religious than Canadian people, but my message wasn't getting out to Canadians. So, and I kept getting comments on my YouTube channel saying, I like what he's saying, but I don't like all that God stuff that he talks about. So I had an idea. Why not do a secular show, but always have that underlining Christian message? So it'd be a conservative show, right? So I started doing that, especially with the election of Donald Trump and how I saw how the mainstream media was acting. I mean, they're just, especially today, they're just out of control. And then Trudeau with his way out left-wing policies, I figured, I'll do a political show. I still do my religious show as well. It's kind of the same. It's the same type of show, only one is religious, the other isn't. And I started doing these political shows, and it's really taken off in Canada. And it kind of worked into my favor, because now my Canadian religious audience has gone way up.
Excellent.
Yeah. So that's how it all kind of got started, and now it's it's pretty successful so far.
Excellent. So it's been a mostly positive experience going public and going online?
For the most part. I mean, you're always going to get your critics,
of course,
and people that try to slander you and stuff like that. That comes with the territory, and I expected that, because with my religious show, I get that all the time. I mean, I have people that watch me. They hate what I say, but they watch me anyway. It's kind of like Howard Stern, They hate what he says, but they want to hear what he's going to say next. So these are the kind of people that are my critics mostly. Mm-hmm. So now I'm starting to get that with the political show, I guess, because the audience is getting bigger. So.
Right, yeah.
But for the most part, it's been positive.
That's excellent. That's really good to hear. But it's true what you say. As the pool grows, you kind of inevitably will bring in more critics and some trolls, no doubt.
Oh, absolutely. It's part of the It's part of the whole thing. I mean, look at the big guys like Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, Rush Limbaugh, all these people. I mean, it comes with the territory. You can't avoid it.
No, you can't, especially in the times we're in now, where everyone is seemingly more worked up over these kinds of issues than previously.
You think?
Yeah, it seems that way. I kind of noticed. So, did you start off doing, like I noticed on your channel, I thought it was really cool that you host a call-in show. Is that kind of how the channel started off, based around the call-in format?
Actually, no. It started with me just doing about a 10-minute commentary on a specific topic. And then I kind of changed it around when I got onto Facebook. I started doing the call-in show, and I was doing Facebook and YouTube at the same time, but it looks like the two companies don't really like people doing that because they're competing when it comes to live streaming. So
right.
My audience on Facebook was larger, so I kind of just stuck with Facebook. So when I started doing the Facebook stream, I started doing a call-in show, and it's been fun. Got a couple of bad calls, but most of them have been pretty positive, and I've been hearing different perspectives on different topics from Canadians from like BC all the way to the Maritimes. I mean, people want to weigh in. They want to talk about the issues, and most of them, of course, are against Justin Trudeau. They just think he's doing a terrible job with this country, and many Canadians feel that way. So,
I totally would believe that. I think even for people, well, even myself, I know some people who supported him in the last election who are now just mortified, you know,
right.
Just totally embarrassed by all of his blunders and stupidity, really.
Yeah, well, and also with the call-in, the people that call in, I feel that the show is kind of uniting people. People hear different perspectives, but there's one thing that kind of unites everybody when they come and watch my show, and that is love of country, patriotism. It's kind of uniting everybody, and it's everybody kind of has like one goal now to save Canada, and so I feel my show is like a kind of like a conduit for that.
Excellent. That must be very encouraging, not just to have that sense of community and a common goal, but also, like you were saying, to be able to hear from people from such a wide geographic range. And I wanted to bring up the call-in show and just kind of tip my hat to you for it, because it's not something that you see a lot in the like kind of mainstream commentary as much anymore. Like, I know I grew up with our local news station being almost 100% call-in based. Right. And it seems like that format for the mainstream has really kind of gotten pushed aside. So,
yeah, well, I think sorry.
No, but because it's just like you were saying, the effects you found with your call-in show, you know, it's really edifying, I think, to be able to hear all those perspectives from people all over the place, and we've kind of lost that.
Right. I remember back in the 90s when I would listen to AM radio here in Toronto.
Yeah.
I think it was Talk 640, 1010. And they would have call-in shows all the time, but they don't do it that much anymore, because I think the mainstream media has gotten so left-wing that they don't want to hear the other side. And I think that's one of the reasons why they stopped the call-in shows.
Yeah, it was the same. Like I grew up in the Ottawa region. I'm back in the Valley now. So for me, it was AM 580 CFRA. You've probably heard of them.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, same kind of thing. You know, they've moved away from the call-in format, probably like 80% or something. And I think I attribute it to a similar factor. You know, like the kind of not just the liberal bias, but the media has become so timid, it seems, and so censorious and so afraid of anybody saying something that might have the complaint line ringing, that just don't bother anymore. And it's discouraging, you know?
It is. And I started to notice that in the 90s when political correctness really started to kick in. People would call in and give their perspective on certain things, and the host would say, well, hold on here a second, you better apologize or whatever for what you said, or I'll just hang up on you right now. And a lot of people got hung up on because they didn't like what they said. I mean, if you're going to host a show and you're going to have people call in, I mean, at least listen to what they have to say. Don't just hang up on them, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So having this experience now with the political focus channel and doing things like the call-in programs, and I know you've done a lot of on-the-ground coverage and a lot of interviews as well, has that changed your assessment of the current state of media in Canada and political reporting? Has it kind of been a black pill for you, so to speak, or has it been, enlightening in some ways? Like, has your take changed in any way from this experience?
Actually, it pretty much reaffirmed everything I knew all along about these politicians and the mainstream media, that they're all corrupt, from the politicians all the way down to the media hosts of CBC and CTV and all the rest of them. It's just reaffirmed everything that I knew about them from the beginning. Yeah,
all of your suspicions are kind of becoming concrete.
Exactly.
Because it seems like, I guess especially in the run-up to our election, there's been a bit more attention in Canada focused on establishment media or kind of old-school media conglomerates versus newer, independent online voices, and not just online commentary, but even blogs and publications like Quillette and Post Millennial. There's this real, almost like adversarial kind of relationship between the two, it seems. So as someone who's... Yeah, and especially... sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, because I think the independent bloggers are actually doing what the mainstream media used to do. And that's why I think there's a clash there, because the mainstream media, they don't do that anymore. They're not on the ground talking to people, investigative journalism. I mean, if you look at Project Veritas in the United States, they do what the mainstream media used to do. And the mainstream media doesn't like that. They have this agenda, and they're going to go through with this agenda. And any investigation into anything, they just don't like. And this is why you see a clash all the time between these independent news outlets and the mainstream media.
Yeah, and it's really become pretty glaring just in the last week with this whole, so-called Jessica Yaniv case, where it's become international news on Twitter and in the kind of independent news sphere. But here in Canada, our mainstream outlets don't want to touch it with a 10-foot clown pole, you know?
Right. And it's why? It's news. People want to read about it.
News. Yeah,
exactly. People want to read about it. People want to know. But unfortunately, when it comes to mainstream media, the news gets filtered. And it trickles down to what they filter out and what they want you to know. Yeah. A lot of people don't know that the news is really, really filtered before it gets to you.
Big time. Well, and you actually made a great case study of that in one of your more recent interviews with Brandy. I'm sorry, I forget her full name at the moment, but maybe you could give a little synopsis of of that story.
Well, that was an interesting story. With what happened with Canada's Wonderland, they had an altercation. There was an altercation between two groups, and what the mainstream media did was they just went to one side of the story, the politically correct side. They asked the Somalians what happened, and not one mainstream media person contacted Brandy asking her side of the story. So her friend contacted me because she went through all the bloggers. She says, I have to get my story out. Facebook took down her posts. She says, I have to get my story out. So her friend introduced her all these independent bloggers, and she felt most comfortable with me. So they called me up. Can I do an interview with you? I want to get my story out. So we did the interview, and because that interview was posted 24 hours later, the charges were dropped.
No way. Didn't know about, that was the update there.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened, because her side got out.
Yeah.
And this story reached across the country. She was even getting calls from Russia telling her that we support you, we believe you.
Wow.
It was incredible.
Yeah, well, I thought it was a really excellent thing for you to do, to give her a platform, because it was really shocking that even though a lot of these news outlets in Toronto and other places in Canada were willing to run the story, like you said, nobody had contacted her. And that, I don't know why I'm surprised anymore, but I still was pretty shocked by that.
Like, look at the news clip. She's not even in the news clip. They went to the National Council of Women, Muslim women, whatever they're called. They asked them for what they saw and their perspective, and no one asked Brandy what happened. No one asked her side of the story. She wasn't even in the news clip. The news clip made it out that this couple, this white Anglo-Saxon couple, purposely went to Canada's Wonderland to target these Somalian women, and start, hurling racial slurs at them and telling them to go back to their country. And that's what you got from that clip. But the real story was this Somalian woman pushed her little kid out of the way purposely, and they had, they exchanged some words there. And then all of a sudden, 15 Somali women surrounded her with her kid screaming and yelling at them. And, of course, the rest of the story.
Yeah.
And the media didn't cover any of that.
That's just awful. It's terribly unfair. And I'm glad that Brandy was able to get her story out. And it's really great news to hear that the charges were dropped following that. That's excellent.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
So besides that more recent interview, like I was saying, your channel is fairly diverse, to use the buzzword, as far as content goes. So I wanted to ask you what it's been like doing some of your on-the-ground coverage with the convoy protests that happened earlier this year during the wintertime, and also with the Yellow Vest movement more generally in Canada, because I know you've covered both.
Right. How it's been so far?
How it's been, what it's kind of like being on the ground during these protests, and if there's any crazy events that stand out, or just, and what your more general takeaway has been attending these things. Like, what do you think that they're effective? I mean, just, any thoughts you want to share about the experience, really?
I feel that the Yellow Vest protests and the United We Roll convoy, before this, I saw that patriotism was at an all-time low in Canada. But now with the convoy that happened, the Yellow Vest that's going on right now, I feel that patriotism is starting to it's starting to fester. It's starting to make a comeback, and you see it with these protests. So that's the good thing I take from it. Unfortunately, what we have right now are a bunch of keyboard warriors online. They all support the Yellow Vest. Thousands of people support the Yellow Vest, but none of them come out to protest. That's the bad thing that I see when it comes to these protests. I mean, the convoy was great, and there was a lot of people. Yeah. But that convoy, and also the mainstream media try to stifle it, try to contain it so nobody knows about it. If that wasn't the case, I think that thousands of people would have showed up there instead of the numbers that we got in February.
Right. Because from what I've heard talking to people, And I think your assessment is absolutely 100% accurate with the Yellow Vests and with all kinds of other activism causes. There's a lot more people who are prepared to click like than who are prepared to leave their house, unfortunately. But yeah, from what I've heard talking to people about the Yellow Vest movement is that this might be attributable to what you're saying about how it's not really given a lot of time and attention in the mainstream, because it seems like in general terms people have some misconceptions about what it's based around. It seems easily confused with what's happening in Paris and the riots, and right. I'm wondering, I guess, how you would assess their movement so far, if you think that they're making progress, or kind of what could be done to maybe de-vilify them in some ways.
I know, because by the end of that United We Roll, the mainstream media pretty much said what they generally say. It was just a bunch of white supremacists out protesting. Meanwhile, there were sure, the majority was white, but there were other people. There were new immigrants there. There was even a man from, I think it was Jamaica, who did a speech. And I remember the rebel media went up to him and said, "Can we ask you a question? Are you a white supremacist?" And he says, "Do I look like a white supremacist?"
Well, depending who you ask. Exactly.
But by the end of that, the media had it all. They just reported a bunch of white supremacists were protesting on the Hill. But I think that the Yellow Vests, right now, they've hit a wall. And for some reason, it's not growing. It's stuck at this place that it's at right now. It's not growing. And I don't know why. I think maybe they need more exposure, or people just don't want to come out and protest. There are supporters, but you don't hear from them. But they have definitely hit a wall right now.
Yeah, I think part of it I think a lot of the reason that you get more likes than, bodies in seats is also because people have a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry about being public on controversial topics right now. Uh-huh. And so I'm wondering if that's something you've noticed as someone who's in the public space talking to people, talking about controversial things.
Well, my mom thinks I'm going to get arrested.
Oh, no.
One day. I haven't experienced any backlash from anyone like Antifa. They never came up and said, "Hey, Peter, we hate what you're doing," and throw urine in my face or anything like that. I do expect some sort of opposition when I'm out there. I haven't experienced it yet. So I mean, like I said, my experience so far has been 98% positive.
Yeah,
but I know others that have, like Vic Boswick and Derek Story of the Noble Savages. They get right in there, and they've experienced quite a bit.
Yeah, I know some of the protests in Toronto where Antifa have showed up. It's gotten a little sketchy, I guess you could say.
Oh yeah,
it seems to be a pattern with them.
Well, they're trying to convince Doug Ford to label them as a domestic terror group. I don't know how that's going so far, but that's what they're trying to do right now.
I think that's been successful in a few states, but I wouldn't hold my breath for on Canada or Ontario, even with Doug Ford.
God forbid anything happens significant like that in Ontario or Canada. Politicians are just not willing to make any significant moves. They don't want to rock the boat because they're afraid of these tiny little minorities out there that, make a lot of noise. Meanwhile, the mainstream Canadians want this, but none of these politicians want to rock the boat in any way, and it's sad. And this is why we never get any change.
Yeah, and I think there's also, from both sides of the fence, I think there's a desire from people to see politicians just talk about controversial things, not just, like you said, toe the line, be tepid, be middle of the road, try not to rock the boat. People are kind of chomping at the bit to actually have it out, to really hash out the big issues. And it's like you said, it's the political establishment and the media are kind of blocking it at all possible angles.
Absolutely. Especially, look at just recently with the movie Unplanned. It's made a huge splash. We need an abortion debate up here, but the politicians don't want to touch it. Andrew Scheer came out, said that we're not revisiting the abortion issue. We have no abortion laws in Canada, yet many, many people are against it, and no one wants to talk about it.
Yeah, that is a big one, and that's something, again, that, Scheer, I guess, is basically taking the same stance that Harper took, thinking that, he can kind of similarly coast into victory a la Harper style.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. It's something that there is a huge portion of the population that wants it addressed, and it's unfair. I think if you're honest about it, no matter where you stand on the issue, you have to admit that the way the pro-life movement is treated in terms of protest rights, and with this movie Unplanned is another big example, are really not given the platform that they're entitled to, really. Exactly.
And when I talk about the abortion issue on my show, I also mention, what about the fathers? We all talk about women's rights and women's reproductive rights and all that. That's fine. But what about the dads? It takes two to make a baby. And no one seems to care what the dad thinks about all of this.
Yeah, well, that's the famous, I don't know if it's from the Democrats' playbook verbatim or if they took it from somewhere else, but the no uterus, no opinion line, right?
Hey, I've never heard that one. That's something.
Oh, yeah, no, I've heard that one many times over the years. And, it just, if there was a similar issue, I think that you said, women can't have a say in this, things would play out much differently, but that's just a suspicion on my part, I guess. But
nice.
Yeah, the abortion issue is a really tough one, and it's one that, it's tough to bring it to the public space because it becomes so emotionally charged that it becomes really difficult to have.
But like Milo Yiannopoulos says, facts don't care about your feelings.
That's true.
Okay, we got to look at the facts, not your emotions. Okay, we have to look at the facts. People can get all huffy and puffy about it, but that's emotions. That's not facts. And we have to look at the facts. We have to look at why women get abortions. They keep talking about incest and rape, but that's a very small fraction of why women get abortions. 70% of them is because it's just birth control. Women don't want it.
Yeah, it's for whatever one reason or another. It's the wrong time. They're not ready. Yeah, it's the extreme cases that always get brought to the forefront in the debate are definitely in the minority.
At least in the United States, they're willing to debate the issues. Here, they just don't want to even touch it, and it's sad. Shouldn't be like that.
No, and I'm not sure. There's a case you might be familiar with, a woman who was based in Ottawa, actually, who was jailed for her continual protest near the abortion clinic in Ottawa, which I thought was a very dangerous step towards shutting down freedom of speech. And again, regardless of where you stand on the issue itself.
You have to give her freedom to
exactly
say what she's got to say. Just like Pastor David Lynn, I interviewed him. Him being arrested for preaching the gospel on a public sidewalk, and they arrested him.
He was the gentleman arrested during the Pride Month.
Right, the street preacher.
Yeah.
And he wasn't preaching hate or anything. He said God loves you. He preached John 3:16. He wasn't preaching hate at all, but they still arrested him. I mean, he's got that freedom to say what he wants to say, but it looks like that freedom is being eradicated right now in our country, especially with Justin Trudeau and his, I call it state-run media now, with his $600 million that he's giving to these people. Unless, you know, they get the money if they don't criticize him, and him clamping down on the internet now on Facebook Canada, saying that they're going to punish Facebook Canada financially if they don't crack down on what he calls the alt-right and independent bloggers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're inching closer and closer towards a state-run media. They even had a conference just recently about it, and it's just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and it blows my mind that they went through with that, too, right on the heels of that Katie Telfer quote leaking about, you know, we can just have some positive op-eds written in regards to the SNC Lavalin case.
Right.
You know, that should have, you know, just set off alarms for everybody.
That should have propped up everybody's ears.
Yeah.
Saying, I'll make you look good with my op-eds if you just, you know, just agree with what we say. I mean, this is ridiculous. This is not real journalism. And this is why I keep saying on my show, we need Project Veritas up here in Canada. We need Sean Hannity's, we need Laura Ingram's, we need Tucker Carlson's. We need people like this up here on television getting a different perspective on the news. All you see on television is just the left-wing side of the news, the politically correct side of the news. And I know people are getting sick and tired of it. Their ratings are in the tank.
Yeah.
Especially CBC. I think their ratings have gone down another 14%. It's just ridiculous. People don't want to watch that nonsense. They took Sun News out. Remember Sun News?
Yep.
It was great, Sun News. You had a different perspective on things. They took it out. They didn't give it any more money. So they had to shut down. We don't have that up here like we have it in the United States. We should have that kind of variety.
Yeah, and they do everything they can to quash rebel media too.
Oh yeah.
And again, you know, love it or hate it. I mean, they have the same right as CTV and CBC and any other outlet to pursue journalism. But they're really. There definitely seems like there's a vendetta against them.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I don't like what the CBC says. I get offended when CBC is promoting trans kids. I think that's disgusting. But they have that right to do so. But they shouldn't shut down my right to say, no, that's wrong, and this is why it's wrong. They shouldn't shut me down or anybody else down for opposing their views.
No, and actually, speaking of CBC and their trans or their drag kids documentary, when that was tweeted, they were ratioed very hard. I think there were thousands of comments and, you know, under 500 likes. And, you know, still, there's no recognition or voice given to that opposition on their coverage or in their coverage.
Right. And they still, I mean, you can oppose it all you want. They will not take it down.
No.
I mean, if it was the opposite, if it was a conservative viewpoint, they will protest it, and they'll go to Facebook Canada or whatever, YouTube, and they will force YouTube or Facebook to take it down, and they will. But when it's the opposite, and people oppose, you know, that documentary just mentioned, you can oppose it, they will not take it down. I mean, it's clear bias.
It is, and actually, it's unfortunate I can't remember the name of the documentary off the top of my head, but there was a documentary, I don't think it was made in Canada, but it was set to air on CBC, and it was looking at this phenomenon of trans and gender identity issues with teenagers, but looking at it from a much less kind of endorsing standpoint, looking at it more from a medical standpoint, and really trying to look for what's causing this. It was it was more investigative than applauding, and I'm pretty sure the CBC pulled it. I don't, they kind of waffled for a while. They're like, oh, we're just going to postpone it, but I don't think it's ever gone to air.
It just kind of shows that this population of 0.04%, how much power they really have in our country. Whatever they say goes.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it's so much a trans lobby as just an incompetent and spineless government that doesn't really care what happens to these people. I mean, this might be the moment that I get Freethinkradio kicked off the internet, but I think that this trans phenomenon that we're seeing in teenagers right now is going to be the thalidomide 2.0, 15, 20 years down the road, or like chemical lobotomies 2.0. Like, this is going to be just a terrible, terrible outcome for a lot of these kids down the road who are being put through medical treatments that I'm confident they can't fully comprehend at that stage in their life, It's just, it's very upsetting, to think about what the consequences of this could be.
Well, you talk to a lot of ex-transvestites, and there are many of them, and they tell you that you get the surgery, and the feeling doesn't go away. It's still there, because it's all in your mind. There's a conflict in your mind that's going on there. It's all mental. It's got nothing to do with your body. Your DNA is your DNA. It's coded. If it says you're a man, you're a man. If you're a female, you're a female. And you can't change it. It's all mental. And a lot, there's high suicide rates in the trans community. They have conflict in their heart and mind about what they are. They need help. We're not supposed to encourage it. They need help.
Yeah, and I listened to an interview on this topic with an endocrinologist, actually, like a hormone specialist, and that was one of his observations. It's just what you were saying, that this is one of the only psychological issues the only psychological issue that the recommended course of treatment is a physical intervention rather than a mental reassessment or recalibration. So it's very, very unusual, and it's very alarming for a lot of reasons.
Absolutely.
But disclaimer, I don't hate trans people. They have the right to exist. If you're an adult, you can do what you want with your body. Please don't kick me off the internet. But so we're hitting all the hot topics here already.
Yeah, but isn't it great discussing these kind of topics? These topics need to be talked about. We shouldn't just sweep them under the rug. They got to be out in the open, discussed, debated.
Yeah. Well, so that's actually a good segue to one of the other things I wanted to ask you about is just this growing polarization and entrenchment between the so-called left and right camps. I mean, how do we kind of restore a productive dialogue? I mean, there's got to be some common causes. So I'm curious what your assessment of that is. Is there something like a common ground we can kind of build from, or how do you get through to these people that basically think you're a Nazi?
Well, I'm not a Nazi.
No, of course.
I know what you're saying. You know what? The left, they have gone now, especially what you see in the States, the Democratic Party. They have gone so far to the left that I don't think they're there is any more common ground between the two camps. If they had any similarities, I think they've disappeared. And it looks like these days you can't talk to the left. It's either you think like them or they don't want to even hear it. That's what I see. And, I always say, why should we listen to the left? What makes them Moses coming down the mountain with the 10 Commandments? Why should we follow their morals? Why are their morals the standards for the country?
That's a good question. I don't think many people are framing it that way.
That's how I see it. Why? Like, if I talk about immigration, let's say, this is my belief, I think immigration should be cut to under 100,000. Now, I say that, and automatically people label me a racist. Well, who says I'm a racist? You? Well, who do you think you are that you label me a racist? Why should I accept your assessment that I'm a racist? Why should I accept your morals? The way you see things. It's just common sense. Yeah.
Well, I think, and this is probably something I imagine you're probably more aware of than the average person, as someone with a spiritual background and who started off doing a religious or a Christian-based show. There really doesn't seem to be a common moral ground amongst Canadians or Westerners or Americans anymore, as things have become more secularized, more diverse, to use that buzzword again, and more ghettoized, not in the sense, like in the traditional sense of ghettoized, like just very insular communities.
Right. I see both camps, left and right. They're all entrenched in their beliefs, and no one's going to give 1 inch to the other. So I really see a split in our societies.
Yeah.
And I hope it doesn't lead to anything like a civil war or anything like that. I hope it doesn't. But when you look at the polarization in society today, thanks to Justin Trudeau, thank you very much. You got enclaves of Muslims over here, and you got atheists over there, and you got Christians over here. And it's the country is just splitting apart, and we just can't seem to find any common ground at all. And this is why I promote patriotism. I believe that patriotism can unite this country from east to west, north to south. And that's the common theme, I believe, that can unite this country together.
Yeah, I think it's a good place to start. Right. I think the common cause of a shared land, a shared home, and wanting to take pride in that and see it prosper is a good base to work from, but it is increasingly fractured, like you say. So it's when everyone has a different idea or a different image in their head of what will make a Canada that they would be proud of.
Well, I think it all boils down to that multiculturalism policy that we have. Instead of uniting, it's divided our country. And when you look at history, like the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, they had a similar policy. This is not new. And it broke up the empires. The Roman Empire broke it up. It broke up the Ottoman Empire. It was actually the one thing that brought down the Ottoman Empire was the multiculturalism that they were promoting. So when it came to World War I, the whole empire fell apart because none of the groups that they had in the empire wanted to fight with the Turks. And they were part of the Turkish Empire. And it broke it apart. And so, this is nothing new. And here we are promoting multiculturalism, and it's splitting our nation apart. It's not bringing it together.
Yeah. Well, history repeats, and nobody learns the lessons. I guess is the age-old moral of the story, unfortunately. But that's also a good lead into another topic I really wanted to talk to you about, is the kind of age-old question of, does Canada have a culture? Is there such a thing as Canadian culture? And I know what my take on that is, but you're the guest, so defer to you.
Well, I believe when you look at our institutions, you look at our founding documents. You look at the architecture of Canada, the buildings that we have. Canada does have a culture. We are a constitutional monarchy of Queen Elizabeth II. You look at our parliamentary system. I mean, where does that all come from? The United Empire Loyalists who started this country and built it from the ground up. And you look at the French. I believe Canada does have a culture. It stems from the British and the French. That's Canadian culture. And people that want to join Canada should accept this culture, become anglicized, and become Canadian. That's how I feel Canada is.
Yeah, it's tough, and I guess that leads back into the problem of polarization, because as much as what you've described is like an accurate description of the founding and the building of Canada, you have a lot of, I guess, progressive-minded people who would say that that's all colonialism, and that's something that Canada should discard and move away from.
Why?
That's. I don't
you look at.
Could answer
I'm
that
sorry,
for them.
but if you look at British colonialism around the world, I'm not saying it was perfect, but it has done more good than any other empire that ever existed. And a lot of some of the claims that a lot of these people make come from old Russian propaganda. A lot of stuff that they say happened really didn't happen. We really need to go back and look at the historical documents and reassess what true history is, because there's a lot of lies when it comes to British colonialism. And I feel that British colonialism has done the most good in this world. More good than bad, that's for sure. And I could quote to you historians that'll tell you the same thing.
And again, that's a side of the argument, though, that you rarely hear, especially in academia. You would be hard-pressed to hear that in a university lecture. I guarantee it.
For sure. You forget about it. You will not hear that. And you will not have a professor. Have you read the book Canada in Decay by Roberto Duchesne?
I haven't. No, I'm familiar. I'm familiar with Duchesne, but I haven't read the book.
Okay, you should pick up that book, and it's an amazing read, and you will look at British colonialism totally differently. And he even has a book about Western civilization. It has done more good than any other empire that has ever existed, and has civilized many peoples. I mean, when the Americans got to this continent, I mean, the Indians didn't even have a wheel, for pity's sake.
Yeah,
they didn't even discover the wheel, for pity's sake. And I mean, they've lifted the lives of many people, civilized many people. They've stopped wars. They've stopped barbarous acts, especially in India. I mean, it's ridiculous how you never hear these things in academia today. It's really sad. But of course, the left, they have an agenda, don't they? So this is why they do what they do.
Yeah, and it's sad too. I mean, even just to see, like, there's been a big push. Well, it was maybe a year or two past now, but there was this real big push on to kind of like take John A. Macdonald out of the spotlight. They took his statue down in Victoria. There's a campaign to take him off of the bill.
Yep.
And it's very upsetting to me, because it's like it's a very dangerous step on the road to revisionism. You know, it's like we've been saying, even if you think John A. was an asshole and a terrible person and incompetent leader, whatever, that doesn't mean you can take away the other side of the story.
Exactly. No leader is perfect. I mean,
no.
If you're going to look for a perfect leader, you're not going to find one.
No, it's counter to the human nature itself, and especially it seems almost ridiculous and very immature in some ways to try to contextualize these historical figures in contemporary times. Like it almost seems like a bad faith gesture to even present that interpretation, without the complete context.
Exactly. I mean, we're trying to fit these leaders that lived 200-300 years ago. We're trying to fit them in the modern day context, which is absolutely ridiculous. And, what I see with them taking down a lot of these statues of the founding fathers of our country, I see the same pattern that happened in Rhodesia and South Africa and continues. What are we going to see now? Because the pattern is exactly the same. Are we going to start seeing what we see in South Africa here in Canada, white squatter camps? Are we going to start to see whites being persecuted in their own country? Are we going to start to see whites getting killed? I mean, the pattern is happening, the same pattern. And I don't want to see that happen here in Canada.
No, South Africa is definitely a warning, I think,
Yes.
A warning for every country out there. It's very, very scary what's happened there. But moving a little bit away from that, I was wondering, I guess maybe a final thing we could kind of touch on, just with all the talk we've had about the kind of left versus right ideologies and political camps. Sometimes I think that the hype we see is more a consequence of social media and internet content overload than it is an accurate reflection of the average person or your neighbor or the guy in the grocery store. And that most people wouldn't really consider themselves exclusively left or exclusively right. So I'm wondering if this is something that you've observed, and it seems to me sometimes that even just the labels left and right are losing their accuracy and their usefulness in political dialogue. So I was interested to hear what your take on that might be.
Well, I don't think it's left and right anymore. I think it's between nationalists and globalists, and the nationalists being the more conservative and the globalists being the more socialists. I think it's turned into that now rather than left and right. I think left and right is more of the 1990s, early 2000s.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that actually that is a more accurate way to describe it, but unfortunately I think the terms nationalist and globalist are so often skewed and kind of misrepresented by, again, mainstream media and political establishments, where as soon as you say nationalist, people think fascist for some reason.
Right.
And, when you say globalist, people don't necessarily think socialist or even communist. They think progressive and cooperative and international and cosmopolitan. And
well, the mainstream media has done a very good job convincing the public that that's the case. I mean, look what you just said about nationalists. If you are conservative, automatically people think you're a fascist or a Nazi, but that's because of the media with the constant propaganda of telling you that the conservatives are fascists and Nazis and all that. But when you look at the Nazi Party and the fascists and the origins of these parties, they promoted Marxism. They promoted socialism. They were socialists. These were hard left-wing people. They have nothing to do with conservatism. They wanted big government and gun control and all the rest like this. But exactly. And everybody knew after World War II that they were left-wing. So what the left-wing did was get into the news media. They got into Hollywood, and they perpetuated the myth that fascists are conservatives. So this is the point I'm trying to get, is that what you just said, the mainstream media has done a good job, perpetuating these myths. And it's just simply not true. Nationalists, conservatives are not Nazis. They're not fascists. The fascists are really the globalists, the socialists.
Yeah, I think they're the real authoritarians, and I think if you were to reframe it, talking to a lot of people, say, would you rather have a very local government that's very close to you, that, is very small and accountable directly to you, or would you rather have bureaucrats in another country writing policy for you? It would change the way people think of these things, but that's unfortunately not the way it seems to be digested.
I think people really need to question everything that the mainstream media spoon feeds them. People don't do that. They just take it in. They look at a headline. Oh, look what happened. And they just take it in. They don't research. They don't use their brains. They don't use common sense and say, is this really the truth? People just don't do it because they have busy lives, or a lot of people don't care, or whatever the reason is. And they just get taken in by all this propaganda.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. And one other thing I wanted to get your take on. This is something I've talked to all the guests I've had on in this series so far, is another big issue that comes up when you're talking about media these days is fake news, obviously, more associated with mainstream media. But then the retort of the mainstream media to fake news, which is usually conspiracy theory. And it's very difficult, I'm sure for everybody, but especially for people, I think, who aren't really interested or involved in these topics, to navigate, what is fake news, what is conspiracy theory, what is legitimate, what is exaggerated. So I wanted to ask how you, as a content creator, navigate stories for those kinds of issues, and also what you think about the labels, everything on the right is a conspiracy theory, or everything on the left is fake news. How do you wade through that swamp?
Yeah, and it is a swamp. I make sure that, number one, that the sources are reliable. And what I do when I read through a news story is that I sift out the bias. I mean, you can just tell the bias in a news story. I sift that out, and I just get to the actual story. And then when I read it on my show, I comment on it using just common sense. Yeah. So I do a lot of sifting through a lot of these stories. And, if I know that the person who wrote this piece is some way out left-wing person, most of the time I just don't even touch it. But if it's hard to find a person who's nonpartisan. If it's a nonpartisan piece, I'll sift through it. I'll see where the bias lies, and just trying to get to the heart of the story, and then just tell the story and tell people what I think. But I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not Alex Jones. I'm not into that kind of stuff. So.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, Jones is he's kind of dug his own grave in some ways. But again, I was discouraged to see that he could just be erased from the internet almost, and that he didn't get a lot of support. There's a lot of people, free speech supporters, who kind of said, "Oh, well, it's Alex Jones, so Yeah. I like Alex Jones when he sticks to the news. Yeah.
Okay. the conspiracy theory, when I watch Alex Jones, because I do watch Alex Jones, I think a lot of stuff that, not just him, but the other people that are there, Owen Schroyer and David Knight, I think a lot of things that they say is really, really good.
Yeah.
But the conspiracy theory stuff, and you know what? If they shouldn't have taken him off the internet. Again, it comes back down to free speech. You may not like what he says, but he's got the right to say it.
Yeah.
That's the point. And if you don't like what he says, here's just a huge, just an idea you want to contemplate if you don't like to watch Alex Jones. Don't watch it. Change the channel. That's all you got to do. Don't force the guy off the air. That's ridiculous.
It is. And it's like you said, it's common sense, really, you know? I mean, it seems like 20 years ago, it would have almost been, not a non-issue, but I mean, the common sense, I feel like, would have prevailed. Mm-hmm. But now that we're in this, like, more volatile kind of time frame, it's like people have just, it's out the window. It's like, oh my God, there's something on the internet that I don't like.
Yeah. And boom, they take it off.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, they're judge, jury, and executioner. It's just off the air.
Yeah. Yeah, well, all right. Well, I've kept you for a little over an hour, Peter. Thank you very much for your time. It's been great conversation, and I'm really happy that you came on. I really appreciate that. But before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to promote anything that you're doing over the summer or anything that's coming up with your channel, any interviews on the horizon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you can catch me on Facebook Live. You can just punch up my name, Peter Salemi. That's Salemi. And you can just punch in the same name on YouTube. You can see my YouTube channel. I got some interesting guests coming up. I hooked up with a publicist who's getting me a lot of guests, especially from the United States.
Excellent.
I'm going to have some American military guests coming in soon. And we're going to talk about the state of the Canadian military from an American military perspective.
Geez. Oh, I'm almost scared. I'm scared already.
So am I.
But that'll be great. I think that's something that would be a big wake-up call for a lot of people if they knew what shambles our armed forces were actually in.
Exactly, and especially the Arctic. You know, a lot of people don't know that the Arctic, our Arctic border, remains pretty much undefended. And China is looking at that border. They want it. And
China is predatory. They are making predatory moves all around the globe.
Exactly. So I'm gonna get some of those guys on there on my show. I got some other guests. I'm working on Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson as well to get on my show. So I got some interesting stuff coming up, and you can catch it on Facebook Live Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Excellent.
Well, I will definitely be tuning in to hear the military gentleman from the U.S. That'll be a good one, I'm sure.
Yep.
And, of course, I will have, when this goes up on YouTube, on the Freethinkradio YouTube channel, I will have your channel and website links included in the description so people can find them with one easy click.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, any final thoughts? Anything else you want to get out there before we wrap it up?
Final thoughts. There's so many things running through my brain right now. I can't. I got a brain fart right now. I don't have any final thoughts right now, but I do like to thank you for having me on your show. This was really fun, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
I would love that. Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. And if people want to check out previous guests that I've had on in this series, I've been trying very hard to talk to people from all sides of the fence. So I've talked to Alex from Freebird Media in Toronto, some of the guys from Freedom Free For All out in Victoria, and I also had out of left field some socialist podcasters on, a thing called the Canadian Love Project, which is... are you familiar with them?
No, it's just they're socialists, but they use this kind of language like love and tolerance and respect. Meanwhile, they're socialists. They don't love anybody. They don't respect anybody.
Well, I thought one thing I will say, they were very nice guys, and they were very nice to take the time to talk to me. But, yeah, it's been great, Peter. I really appreciate it. And, yeah, anytime. You're welcome back.
All right, great. Thank you.